And we appreciate it. I know Charlie does. I know Herschel does, and I know that they will agree with me wholeheartedly. We are just representative of what the Marshals Service was then, and hopefully what it is now. I've said before in other forums, and I'll say it again, that the people in this country do not understand or really know enough about the United States Marshal Service and the deputies, the most unheralded group of law enforcement people in the world. And they just quietly get the job done. And that's all we were down here to do. We had feelings about it, of course. And the majority of us felt that this was the right thing to do, and we were going to do it to the best of our ability. We had some among us who, because of their birthright, and I'm a Southerner, born and raised in the South, but I knew that this was something that had to be done. And these little girls at the time had to be protected, and the order had to be carried out. And we represent I don't know, Charlie, Herschel with them. There may have been a total of 40 or 50 deputies in New Orleans at that time for that thing, but there were 8 of us that went in the schools. And of the 8 that went in the schools, there are only 4 of us left alive. And
I think there were about 40.
How many?
40 altogether.
Okay, about 30. So we were not the only ones. We're proud to be here to represent the others. And I'll pass this along to one of the ladies if they want to start talking. How about you? Yeah.
Sick 'em, Leone. That first morning was, when I woke up that morning, I was awakened to get prepared. It was like a normal morning. At least I thought it was. But it seemed like a holiday morning, you know, when your family's in there cooking and it's a crowd of people and, you know, we just getting ready to celebrate something. And I can remember everybody had a task. Somebody was cooking breakfast. Somebody was getting my clothes ready. And my mom, you know, she was dressing me. But I don't remember her saying too much that morning. So about around the time when it was time for us to leave and the marshals arrived, it was like all the motion, it just got still. So I knew then something was about to happen, but I had no earthly idea it was going to be that. So we took the journey, and on our way to school, I felt special. I was getting a ride to school. You know, somebody was driving me to school, and once we reached the front of the school building, it was like, to any 6-year-old child, you would have thought it was Mardi Gras. I mean, it was a crowd of people on the outskirts screaming and yelling, and I didn't pick up on everybody being white, but for some reason I just didn't see that color. And all I thought was that a parade was coming, and but I had to go to school. And so we finally got in the building, and I can remember all of us sitting on the outskirts of the office for a while and just waiting to get put in the classroom. But by the end of the day, there was nobody left in the classroom but the 3 of us. And that lasted for a year and a half. All teachers in place, but only 3 students for a year and a half.
Well,
Go ahead, Gail.
use this one. I must have didn't have too much of a celebration at my house because I don't remember everybody cooking. It's not on.
There's no, okay.
This one? Can y'all hear me? Yeah, okay. It must not have been too much of a celebration at my house because I don't remember everybody cooking and having tasks to do that day. A lot of it I don't remember, but I do remember going to school. I don't remember the preparation for that day. I remember riding in the cars. I think I remember the marshals coming and pick me up, but I remember riding in the car, and I remember coming to the school And for those of you who saw that picture in the car with me looking out the window, I didn't think it was a Mardi Gras. I was scared. You know, all I could see is these crowds of people, you know, saying all kind of things. Looked like they had things in their hand, and if they could get to me, I thought they was going to kill me. I didn't know what I had done, but I knew it was a bunch of people that looked like they might have been upset or angry with me. So Chester and Leona mentioned that they weren't scared, but I know darn well I was scared. That's basically all I remember about that first day. I remember going to the school. I remember sitting in the vestibule with Leona and them, and I remember being out there quite some time before we went to the class. And I remember parents taking the kids out to class, and some of the kids didn't look like they wanted to go. The parents were like pulling them out, come on, let's go, let's go. And the kids weren't too happy about that. And that's basically all I remember that day. I know for the remainder of that year and part of the next year, we went to school by ourselves. We had a great teacher. We used to have fun at McDonogh 19 because it was just the three of us. We'd eat lunch in different rooms. You know, it was like it was a game going to a different room, eating lunch. We couldn't see out the schools, out the classrooms rather, because the windows were covered. I'm saying this, but I think Tessie and Leona might have said it and maybe jog my memory with the classrooms with the brown paper, but it was an experience that I'll never forget.
When I spoke to you, you said you actually used the word Mardi Gras, and that was 30 years ago.
Right. That's what I could only associate that crowd with, because McDonogh, where McDonogh is located, was a parade route from St. Bernard Parish. There was a Mardi Gras club that had a parade that would come down St. Claude Avenue, and my parents would take me out there to watch the parade. So when we got to McDonogh, that was what I thought this was. You know, that's the only thing I could associate it with. But that morning when the marshal came to pick my daddy and I up, my mother was home. My grandmother, I think, was home. And my mother was scared to death. She was a nervous wreck. And she told the marshal, she said, I'm giving you my baby. This is my baby. And he told her, he said, this is my job. And I'm going to take care of this baby. You don't have to worry about that. And like Mr. Al was saying, these are unheralded heroes. You know, they came, they didn't know us. We didn't know them. And they did their job. And that day, I did not feel any fear at all. My daddy was there, and the deputy was there. And that was it. I had no fear whatsoever. I mean, a 6-year-old, especially with your daddy, you think that's the strongest person in the world. I mean, I thought he could beat Goliath and King Kong with one arm tied behind his back, you know. So I didn't have any fear. And when we got to the school, he told me, he said, put your hand in my hand and look straight ahead. And I said, okay. So the marshals escorted us up the steps. When we got in the school, like Gail said, we were in the vestibule right outside the office, and it seemed like an eternity. It was like they didn't know what to do with us once we got in there. There were people passing and looking at us, but then in the same way, it was like they were overlooking us, like we were invisible. And I remember saying, Daddy, what we gonna do? What we gonna do? So he said, I don't know, baby, you know, just, and I remember getting up, skipping, hopscotch, you know, just a 6-year-old, because we had been there for such a long time. And I don't know how long it was, I don't know who it was that escorted us, but when we got to the class, it was a class of white children and Gail and Leona. I didn't really know them at the time. We lived in the same neighborhood, but we were 6-year-olds, so we didn't, you know, venture out like talking about it. And we were sitting in class, and Miss Meyer was teaching, and all of a sudden you see children disappearing. You know, somebody would just come and just snatch a child out the classroom. And by the end of the day, like they said, there was no one else but us in that classroom and Miss Myers. And for the year and a half, the rest of the school year, half of the next year, we were the only kids at McDonogh. It was just the three of us. And it was a haven in the building. Once we got out, we saw this crowd and this noise. You couldn't really hear what they were saying. After watching it on television, I was able to hear what they were saying. But when we were out there, it was just noise. That's all you could hear. It was just noise and this big crowd. And we come out to school and we get in the Marshals cars and they bring us home. And the next day it was the same thing. They came and they picked us up and they brought us to school and we went through this crowd. They never got near us. They were at a distance, but you could still just hear this loud, loud noise. And once we got in the classroom, it was just peaceful for us. We couldn't hear them, we couldn't see them because the windows were covered. And Miss Myers was a sweet, sweet lady. She was an elderly lady, it seemed to me. Now, I don't know how old she was, but it seemed to me she was. And right, you know, but she tried to make us feel as comfortable as possible and as safe as possible, you know. So we really didn't have at least I didn't, really didn't have a problem at McDonogh.
I didn't know these three girls because I was at France school and not where they were. But everything was pretty much the same as what they've talked about. I knew it wasn't Mardi Gras. I didn't see any beads flying around. And I thought it was the wrong time of the year because I had heard of Mardi Gras before. But I did hear a lot of the kids talk loud. They thought it was Mardi Gras, but I just couldn't see it. I guess I wasn't tuned into it like they were. But the things that went on there were undescribable. I couldn't believe grown people would act the way they did about four girls going to school. It just didn't make sense to me. The three of us just did what we had been doing for a long time. I don't know whether we were scared or not. We might have been. We were too dumb to be scared. But we just went ahead and did what we were supposed to do. And it went on and on for several months. This France school just had one girl and nobody else there for all those months. And we would take her to school every morning, take her home at night, come back the next morning, take her to school, back at night. And that went on. I got there sometime early in November and stayed until Christmas vacation. And then I was relieved. I went home and somebody else took my place. And I never, ever went back again there. I got back later. Later on, I became the marshal at New Orleans, in the Eastern District. And then I got a little more acquainted with the city and lived in Slidell for 16 years. So I became a native here, more or less. But what we did was just a job that we had to do, and we did it not only in New Orleans, many, many places, many schools, all over several states. And I'm just glad it all turned out as well as it did.
Like Charlie, I looked at the crowds of people from a different perspective. It didn't remind me of Mardi Gras. What it did remind me of was a training film I had seen in the military police school when I was in the Army. And it was of a line of police that were trying to control a crowd of people, and I believe it was made in Japan or somewhere overseas. And this crowd of people overwhelmed the police. And I could envision something like that happening to us, because we understood that the New Orleans police were going to support us, but we didn't know for sure. Our leaders had been talking to Chief Geruso and maybe other people, but we didn't really feel the confidence that it was going to be anybody out there to face the crowd but us. And it was pretty scary. I'll admit that was a pretty scary trip from the Marshals office to by the girl's house and out to the school. I was pleasantly surprised when we got to McDonogh 19 to see that the whole school campus was surrounded by New Orleans policemen. Some of them were on horses, but they were out in force. And so they kept the crowd back across the street, so all we had to deal with was taunts, and there was a lot of that, a lot of yelling, but the police actually kept the crowd away, so we didn't have to fight our way through the crowd, which I really expected to be what we were going to have to do. I was from Little Rock, Arkansas, and I was in college in the 50s when they integrated the Little Rock schools, and there was violence there. And as some of you may recall, President Eisenhower sent in the 101st Airborne because the governor of Arkansas had used the National Guard to keep the black students out of the schools. And there was violence, people got roughed up, and so I knew it could happen. But fortunately, it didn't. Things went smoothly. I will say these were some brave girls, because there was a crowd out there, and I didn't know till this weekend down here that the crowds reminded them of Mardi Gras. It was just an ugly crowd as far as I was concerned. But it was a unique experience. I was a rookie in the Marshal service, and I just been a deputy marshal for about 6 months when I was sent down to New Orleans. So it was all new to me, but something like that was new to most people in the Marshal service. Most everybody had law enforcement experience somewhere, but dealing with crowds in the school integration was something that most people had never experienced before.
Right, because that's what my dad had told me. You know, he told me when we got out the car, he said, look straight ahead. Just keep your eyes straight ahead. So I guess he figured that if I wouldn't see it, that, you know, maybe I wouldn't have that fear. Right, because when, and as far as with my mother, I was, because I got home that afternoon and I asked her why did she send me to school on that day, you know, and then why she didn't come and get me like everybody else's mama did, you know. But, yeah.
And Leona, you had memories of some specific people when we talked, again, many, many years ago, and you talked about working and sitting next to a woman when you worked for the phone company, I think, right? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. I kept a scrapbook. My aunt kept a scrapbook of a lot of pictures, and there was a lady that was in the crowd that was, you know, one of the people that were yelling, and I always looked at that picture. So I got a job, my first job ever at the age of 19. I started working at the telephone company, and I was an operator, and I met a lady, and we sat next to each other, and I kept looking at her, and I kept saying, this lady looks familiar. And she mentioned that she lived in Chalmette and she baked cakes. And something brought me to that book. And I've never said anything to her, but that was that lady. But she baked my daughter's birthday cake.
So your daughter's here, right?
Yes, my daughter's here.
So when I interviewed you, both your daughter and son were both there, but they were about this high.
Right.
Or this high. And you can hear them in the background of the case. At Tessie's house, you can hear her grandmother playing soft religious music very quietly behind the case. But said, I would never eat one of those cakes.
Yes, she did. But I mean, it was a whole another era. You know, she was a total different person. You know.
Sure. But no, you go.
I want to add one thing here. It's maybe a little bit off of the immediate subject, but sitting at the other end of this table, Charlie Burks was a hero before he ever came into Marshal service. He also spent some time in prison before he came into Marshal service. But fortunately, it was a German prison camp. Charlie flew bombers in the Second World War, and he crashed that expensive airplane just because the Germans shot it full of holes. And they put him in jail. But he had a good parole officer, and he got out, and then we got him. So we had a true hero on board when we started. A bigger hero than any of us are.
Al, it was either you or Herschel that talked about a meeting with the judge before you started your work, and
Yeah,
do you want to talk about that?
you had to
You
ask.
can be gentle. I mean, you know.
Yeah, yeah. I had been in police work from 1951, and I thought I was 10 foot tall and bulletproof, and there's no question in my mind about it. I was aggressive. Whatever was in my head came out my mouth most of the time. That's not always a good thing to have happen. There was a meeting with Judge Skelly Wright, and God rest him, he's dead now, just before we went to the school. And I had the detail going to McDonogh 19. And Judge Wright said, I have been informed that the state police are going to prevent you from going into the school. And being young and stupid, I pulled the court order halfway out of my pocket, and I said, Your Honor, is this order worth the paper it's written on? He said, well, of course it is. I said, then if anybody tries to stop me, it's going to be his and my butt all over those steps. And I cleaned up the reference to my anatomy for the sake of the crowd here tonight, and because our moderator suggested that maybe I should. And if that happened today, Director Clark would probably send me to Guam or someplace.
Well, Gail, when I met with you and your dad, he was so passionate, and by then it had been 20 years later, and you and he had obviously had conversations and talked. But besides being passionate, it seemed to me that it was very heavy on him of what you went through. And I think that's probably true to certain extents of both Tessie and Leona's parents in different ways. So I know that this wouldn't be memories of when you were 6 years old, although maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there are some of that too. But could you talk a little bit about the effect on family and your conversations later on of the time with your families, and maybe we'll pass it around and do that. And the Marshals could do the same thing, because obviously they've talked with their families and have families, and it was a huge thing that you were all involved in.
Well, most of my conversation was with my dad.
Yeah.
Like you say, he really took this seriously. And I don't know if it was when you asked the question, you know, why he did it or would he do it again. He said he did it because at the time he felt that we would get a better education going to the white schools than we were going to the black schools at the time. And the white schools were given, you know, new books and good supplies, and the black schools were given, I guess, used books, torn books, or whatever. So he said that if he had to make that choice to do it again, he would do it again, because he felt it was something that needed to be done, and he wanted me to have the best opportunity that I could have. He always told me that to be careful about the things I did and be careful about the things I said, because we were always being watched, you know, and we had to carry ourselves in a certain way. We shouldn't act up, and we need to be good in school and be obedient and strive to do the best things that we could do. A lot of people made a lot of sacrifices, you know, and they went through a lot for us to get to that point that day, or that time. And it just was a important thing for my dad, and it was heavy on his heart, and he was concerned about me a lot, because I was always coming home complaining about things that was happening, but it wasn't at McDonogh 19, if I could say. It was at Sims.
Right.
We had a lot of problems at Sims. When we went to Sims, we didn't go there like we did at McDonogh 19, where the students' parents came and took them. When we went to Sims, we went to school with a school full of students that weren't afraid to be there and that didn't want us to be there, and it was obvious that they didn't want us to be there. They used to beat us, they used to kick us, they would spit on us. I got hit in the stomach with a baseball bat. You know, the teachers wouldn't do anything. At recess time, we'd hide underneath a tree. That was our little protection. And when we went back to school last week with Sally Ann, the tree looked like it tripled in size. You know, we said, well, what happened to the tree? It was just a little small tree, but looked like it's growing. And then the yard that was so big looked like it shrunk, you know. It was strange going back there. You know, it looked so different. The yard looked like they had cut it in half. And it was amazing to us. But that one tree was a place that we would go every day after recess. And it was, during recess, and it was our like little protection, even though, you know, all of us couldn't get around that tree and it couldn't protect us, but that's what we would do. And I would go home and complain to my dad what they did to me. And what my dad would do, you know, he wasn't a violent person. He would sit down, get his little tablet out, and write a letter and have me bring it to the school, you know, to complain to the principal about all the things they was doing his child, and it wasn't right, you know, and expecting the principal to do something about it. And of course, nothing was done. It would go through the same thing over and over again. But he was steadily writing those letters. He kept on writing them. I don't know how many he wrote. He wrote a bunch of letters. And we had that problem at Sims. It was so different than when we went to McDonogh 19. It was the teachers and the students. It was just a different experience.
I'm glad you said that about the teachers, because I know
Oh yeah, the teachers too.
your mother talked about that.
We had
a lot.
one special teacher.
And the teachers encouraged the kids too, right?
Yeah, they did. They did,
Talk
you know.
about that a little bit.
You know, some of the kids, I had one experience where one kid touched me accidentally, and then she made the comment that her skin didn't change, that she didn't turn black. You know, and somebody told them children that, because you don't just think of that as a kid. You have to be taught that. And then sometimes some of them want to play with us or want to be with us, but if somebody was watching, you know, they wouldn't do it. They would sneak, you know. So we used to think that, you know, that they were being taught that. And then we had one particular teacher. It might seem minor, but she used to bake brownies or cookies or whatever it was, and she would give it to the white students and wouldn't give us none. And, you know, at that age, you know, we wanted a cookie or a brownie, whatever it was, too. And she didn't. She would give it to the students and do it right in front of us. And like I said, it might sound like something small, but at maybe 7 years old or 8 years old, however old we were at the time, it seemed like a big deal. And why would a grown-up do something like that? You know, so we really had a time at Sims. It was rough. Leona was there with us for the first year, but Leona, you left us, huh? You took her. She left being tested.
Leona's mother didn't just write letters. I can guarantee you of that. I don't know if you want to talk about that or
Miss
not,
Louise?
but,
You want to talk about your mom?
Now, I tip my hat off to Louise Tate. And she was courageous. She didn't tolerate you doing anything to her babies too easily. I had to ride a school bus, and a little boy spit in my hair. And till today, I'm funny about my hair. And when you got to get your hair combed every day like that, you know, you're kind of mad about your hair. And that was the worst thing I could ever think that somebody could have done me, because it's like I can still smell that odor when I think about it. And he kicked in the back of the seat that I was sitting in. So the bus driver went to the office and told them that I broke the seat. So by the time I got home to my mother, well, how the NAACP got there so fast, I don't know. But you know, she knew who to go to, and she just had that support, you know. But she was in that office, and she wasn't writing no notes. She was coming, So, and then there was another parent that would always harass us when we left the building. So she told me one day, she said, "When you come out of that building, you just pass me up like you don't even know me." And the lady told me something. Well, I don't want to say what happened to that lady.
Are you good, Tess?
Will you whisper in my ear and tell me what happened to that?
Sims.
Because you called McDonogh a haven.
Right, and it was compared to Sims. Sims was the devil's domain. That's what it was. It really was for us. It was terrible, terrible 4 years of my life. I'll never forget that. That's the last time I ever had a fight in my life. We had to fight every day for 4 years. We didn't fight for 4 years. We were in fights. We maybe had fights maybe the last year or so, but the other years we were just beaten. And like Gail said, there was this teacher, Miss Dunn, who was just evil. She was evil, and she would encourage the children to kick us, to hit us, to throw things at us, to spit on us, to just be, just treat us like dirt. And our parents went to school, to the principal, to her, but nothing was ever done about it. Nothing was ever done. And we went through that every day. For 4 years we went through that. And Gail and Leona got suspended. Right. They wrote a letter. You all wrote a letter, and you signed the letter. Yeah, they threatening someone and signed their name.
Leona, did that happen to you more than once?
No,
Okay.
no, just that one.
Yeah.
It was sisters, and for some reason they would just picked on me and Gail all the time. So we were sitting huddled at the tree, and she came and she pushed my head like that. Well, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. But we always had this thing in the back of our mind that we were told that if we got in trouble, there were going to be black dots put on our records. And if we got 3 black dots, we were going to be put out of school forever. We would never be able to go back to school again. So this was always in the back of our mind. And so we didn't say anything to her. We wrote her a letter. We put a few choice words in there, but we signed our names and we put it in her desk. So of course she turned the letter in. We got suspended for 3 days. My mother went to the NAACP, so that took care of that. But they were amazed because we spelled every word correct. We didn't do that.
Yeah. Herschel, when I spoke to you, you talked a little bit about first coming, and you talked about the different marshals that were here and the local people and the kind of the time and the culture at the time in the town, because you worked with marshals that were from New Orleans, right? And it was a tricky time because they had family, neighbors, and stuff that were putting pressure, and that's part of the story that might be worthwhile to talk about.
All right. The deputies I worked with in Little Rock had been deputy marshals when the schools were integrated up there in 1957. And they didn't have to escort anyone to school, but they did serve papers on the governor, and they were involved in court procedures. And they had deputies that I worked with told me they had friends that they lived beside or lived with, known for years, that wouldn't speak to them. And I know the same thing was experienced with some of the deputy marshals down here at New Orleans. Of course, I was a single person, didn't have to worry about my family being threatened or whatever, and I was from out of town. But yeah, they were the deputies were ostracized by their people in the community. I don't know anything about any particular threats or anything, but they were made aware that the public didn't like their involvement in the integration.
And I think the same thing happened to the teachers that were at your school, because here was a group of teachers, and I think there was one teacher that left, but the rest stayed, and they didn't meet with people talking to them or hitting them or fighting with them, but they sure met with family scorn, a lot of them, and they said similar things to what you said, Al, about this was something that needed to be done and was long overdue, and that was their commitment to being at the school. And I think part of it, too, that should be recognized is even though he was a rookie principal, he was his first year, which tells you something about the New Orleans school system at the time of having a first-year principal. He was directed and he was committed, and one of the things, and it wasn't totally possible, but one of his commitments was there might only be 3 6-year-old girls at this school, but they're going to get some kind of education being here every day as first graders. Maybe we're going to have time for some questions, but maybe we could just take a moment for each of you up here to give you 30 seconds or so to think this through. And maybe each of you, I know this wasn't the format that we had before, but each of you talk to what stands out. I don't mean necessarily events, but as you reflect on this, what are the reflections? And that can be whatever you want it to be, and if it connects to today, fine. If it doesn't. But you lived this event, and none of us, well, some of us did, but most of us didn't. And your families lived the event, and it would be nice to kind of, I'll call it a word of wisdom, because I don't have to do it, but from each of you from this. So why don't we take a few seconds, unless somebody's ready to talk to that right away. And we can just go, anybody that wants to start.
Well, I'll just mention the thing that I think of is the dignity of the students and the courage they've shown, and it's very well illustrated in that Norman Rockwell painting that I don't think it depicted any particular person, but it very well depicted the atmosphere that was there, the determination of the deputy marshals, and the dignity of the students as enduring the insults and all to go to school.
I think one of the things that I thought about the most, well, number one was the pride in the service. It was the right thing to do, and it was extremely important to me to help see to it that it was done and was done properly. At the time, I had 2 very small children. A year after, one year after this occasion, my 3rd child was born. She's sitting in the audience listening to me now. But one of the things that was in my mind is that I have 2 small children, and they're not school age yet, but when they get to be school age, I'll be damned if anybody's going to tell them they can't go to school. And that's the way I felt about it. Nobody had a right to tell these ladies that they could not go to school. And I sincerely felt that we as deputy marshals, if we didn't get the job done, we were going to set the whole movement back God knows how many years. It just had to be done. Well, Herschel mentioned Little Rock, and that was really Little Rock was the impetus that created the U.S. Marshals doing the civil rights enforcement, because Eisenhower said he never wanted to send troops against American people again unless it was an emergency. So the job was given to the United States Marshal Service, rightfully so, because they had the most authority of any agency in the country. And we did pretty well. We did have a couple of emergencies later on where they had to send troops, but not there.
what I've thought about over the years and what has bothered me is the fact that the three of us really couldn't and didn't talk about what we did. A lot of people, we won't say all people, but a lot of people didn't really understand what it was that we had done. And there were those that did understand, but just didn't want to know. So for years, we just didn't talk about it. We talk about it amongst ourselves if we ever got together, but it was just something that we just basically kept to ourselves. You try to explain it to some people, but I did the same thing, in 1972. I did the same thing in '69 or whatever. And they didn't understand that it was something that was done and it was different. We're talking about 1960. We're talking about 6-year-old girls. I mean, it was completely different. It was something that was done and it had never been done before like that. And they just didn't understand it, and it bothered me, and it still bothers me, but what's going on now with the 50th anniversary and the recognition that we're getting and everybody coming together, and I was getting a chance to meet the Marshals, it's making me feel a whole lot better. I'm glad about this, but that's something that has bothered me for years, why people didn't understand or why people didn't want to know. About it. For those who didn't understand, if we would try to explain it to them, they didn't really want to know about it. And now with this going on, hopefully everybody, most people will get to understand exactly what it is that we did, what we went through, and hopefully it has been for some good.
And I know that I think I started to say this before, but I know that your dad suffered that too, and he was very protective, but he took it to another level, and I think because this is telling the stories it's worthwhile to think about, is that there were people that came, but there were a lot of people that exploited initially too.
They did.
And were willing to use the three of you.
And that bothered him.
Terribly, I know, and I think that's an important part of the story, even though it's not part of a celebration, it's part of the story.
Well, they were in it for the wrong reason, he said, and that wasn't the reason that he was in it.
Right.
And it really bothered him that was happening. I know we don't want to call any names, but a certain person came and talked to us as kids, and my daddy didn't like the way that turned out. So he was just
I remember.
using it, he was just using us, so he was truly upset about that. And he was vocal to you and to me about it too. Yeah.
Excuse me. What I'd like to say is, and recognize the courage and the strength it took for our parents. Because those are the heroes, really and truly. I don't have any children of my own, but I know it must have been very difficult for my parents to see me come home every day just beaten down, emotionally, physically, and to still have that encouragement to continue doing this. And like Gail said with her daddy, my daddy was very upset about the exploitation that some people were trying to do. It got to a point that he wouldn't even interview. You couldn't interview him at all. You were really, that was something different because he did not.
No, and he didn't want to do formal interview either. We talked for an hour and a half at the fence between your grandmother and your house.
Yeah, he wouldn't interview because he felt that people were using us and they were in it for the wrong reasons, and that's not why we were sent to McDonogh. I lived 3 blocks from McDonogh, 19. The school I was going to was Joseph Hardin. It was 12 blocks from my house. I used to walk to school with a 2nd grader and a 3rd grader. And at that time, the school was on platoon system, so 1st graders went to school half day. My mother worked, my daddy worked, my grandmother worked. So there was nobody for me to come home 12 o'clock. My mother's mother worked at Hardin as a custodian, and she got with the principal, and I was able to stay in school the entire day. So then I was able to walk back with the 2nd and the 3rd grader. They were sisters. They were neighbors of ours. So McDonogh I was in the district. I was 3 blocks away from the school. Why shouldn't I be able to go there? And my daddy always said that, you know, why shouldn't you go there? And so the courage that it took for our parents, that's the thing I want to recognize. And I remember and reflect on it.
You've hit on an issue that was in New Orleans definitively, but in other places too, of when integration happened in New Orleans and other cities, and then later on when people protested against school busing because you should have neighborhood schools. Nobody was pushing for black kids to go to neighborhood schools before 1955, and certainly not 1960. Kids went a long way past the neighborhood school because schools were segregated at the time. The other thing I wanted to and again, I'm not asking you to go further with it, but I wanted to bring up was that by the time I met your dad, he had a great sense of political analysis. And so he didn't only talk about the exploitation, but when he talked about things aren't happening like they were supposed to from McDonogh 19, he was talking about Sims, but even more than Sims, because he was talking about his hope was for much more from this happening, not for necessarily you, but in general of people. And he talked politics with me for a good half hour of his analysis of it, and it was, you know, it could have come out of any political science department, that's for sure. So it was very painful.
Yes, it was. It was.
Anybody else? I was going to bring up families, so thank you for doing that. And we've got these mobile mics, and our mic seems to be working again, I hope. I think this one is, right? There's going to be people that will have mics, and we'd love to take the conversation further by including everybody here. So if you have questions, if you raise your hand, I'll pick. There we go, we've got one already. So we'll get a mic to you, and you'll have to come to the end, I guess, to ask. And you can address it to everybody, anybody, okay? Except me.
Well, I just would like to say my mom is the one in the middle, Gail. I love all three of y'all, and I would like to thank the Marshals for coming out and finally meeting my mom and Miss Leona and Miss Tate, because, I mean, this is an honor for them. But the question I have for the Marshals and my mom and my aunties, so I say, to what extent did you guys protect them? I mean, I know y'all picked them up and brought them to school, but how was it after school? Did y'all have to stay and protect them afterwards? Because, I mean, they grew up in the lower 9th ward, and McDonogh 19 is in the lower 9th ward. And at the time, I know it was very hateful. And by them being 6-year-old girls, wouldn't you be scared to think that people would come to the house to do y'all something? I mean, were the Marshals there to protect y'all at night? Or, you know, I guess that's the question. I don't know.
I can answer that. We picked them up, the girls at school, at home, drove them to school and stayed in the school building with them. And I was there the first week, and then I went home for a week and came back for 3 more weeks. And the deputies just stayed in the school. The crowds gradually diminished as time went by, and the police were there as long as necessary to keep the crowds across the street. But at the end of the day, we drove the students back home, and then, as far as I know, there was no protection for them at home. The Marshals didn't do it.
We had somebody.
Oh, they had police. Well, but
the New Orleans police, we had protection at our houses.
That I didn't know about that. It was not the deputies, because I was one of the deputies at McDonogh 19 for 3 more weeks, and after school was out, well, we were off duty.
Okay.
The NAACP and the New Orleans police, I don't know how much they worked together before this, but I know that people that were academics at the time who wanted to do interviews, they had to go through the NAACP and get police escorted to your homes because there was a protective area for that. But that said, Leona, your dad had stories about worrying and about feeling that he needed to protect from people coming from St. Bernard Parish. I know that too.
I'd like to say something about that. Can I? I remember one particular night. My dad went outside.
I can't hear you.
They can't hear me. Can y'all hear me now? Okay. Okay. One night, my dad went outside, and my mom went outside, so I followed him, and I stood between my parents, and there was this car in front of our door, and the police were shining lights on our house, and this guy, they took him out the car, and they went to the trunk of his car, and they opened it up, and it was a long gun. You know, I guess it was a shotgun. I didn't know what it was. I was 6 years old, but it was a long gun. And they took the man, and they put him in handcuffs, and they took him away. You know, and I never knew what happened to that man, but I remember protection. I thought it was the federal marshals, but I remember police protection, some type of protection in front of our house where they were shining lights on our house for quite some time.
Yeah, and there were somehow, even though your folks were getting their phone numbers changed constantly, there were constantly phone calls, harassing phone calls. I know your grandmother told me about answering the phone and talking to people and going, you should be ashamed of yourself. Does your preacher know you're making these calls? But that also talks to the city at the time, because your numbers were changed, and within minutes, people had the numbers. There were beautiful, beautiful letters from all over the world, but there were also very hateful letters from all over the world. And I can't speak for Gail or Leona's house, but I remember from Tessie's that her dad told me about sorting hate mail. And yeah, and sorting it, I'm talking about at the post office, but then also sorting it at home to make sure. So when Tessie, and I'm sure the two of you too, saw a letter or a postcard, it was absolutely wonderful. But and I have to say, from going through the things that came, I'd say about 80% were quite wonderful, and about 20 were horrific. And I don't know if you've seen those since, but I hope not.
You spoke about my dad. My dad worked in St. Bernard Parish. So his identity was hidden for a long time. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. And Tessie spoke earlier about the parade that used to come up St. Claude Avenue. And he was one of the people that would make the floats. He was the welder that would make the mechanical part of the floats that would win the parade in that area every year. So his identity was kept secret for a long time because he was really afraid from working in that area.
He told me, and I've written about this, about he worked for a gentleman, well, that might be the wrong choice of words, but he worked for a man who, he said, gave him a lot of work. Right. And at one point, or actually at more than one point, the man said to him, so what do you think about this school integration stuff? Those people must be getting paid a lot of money. And Leona's dad said, all I could think of was, God, I wish he was right. But, you know, it was like...
I'm Tessie's mother. May God be the glory. When Tessie integrated to school, the Marshals came and got her, brought her to school and brought her back. And we had policemen watching the house and federal marshals. While we slept, they watched our house. I had no problem. It was just like when Moses was in the water and Miriam watched over him. The policeman watched us, And guess what? One of the policemen was my cousin. And he told me that he was a number away, just dial, he'd be there. And when the marshals came that morning, would come, and he would take Tessie, and I said, Lord, Tessie was my honest child at that time. And I said, Lord Jesus, I'm giving you my baby. Bring her back home. And he told me, he said, don't worry. I have this child in my hand. He said, if anything would happen, it's going to be me, not you. I went back in the house and I prayed every morning. When she left, no worry at all. My dresses went back down to my ankle. In a couple of months, they came right back up where they were supposed to be. And that's it. I thank you.
Is it on already? Good. I got a question over here for the marshals or for the moderator who said he wouldn't answer any questions. This is for anybody who knows. I've been assuming that the covering of the windows at the school was done for reasons of security. I'd like to know, if you know, who was responsible for making that decision? Was it the Marshal Service? Was it NOPD? Was it the NAACP or someone else?
It clearly wasn't the NOPD. I'm making an assumption here, okay? My assumption is that it was the principal and the faculty at the school, because when they got a call on Friday, November 11th to go to, actually to a bus depot that was owned by the school district on the outskirts, I forget where it was in New Orleans, but it was on the outskirts of New Orleans, and the principals from both schools were called there. And they were told by Jim Redmond, who was the superintendent at the time, that their two schools would be integrated the following Monday morning. They were to tell no one. And they were to go home, and they were to be there by 6 o'clock, and when their faculty came, they were to tell their faculty. The principal from France School, whose name was Estelle Barkemeyer, and who was also in her first year as a principal, followed the instructions. Jack Stewart, I mean his name was John Stewart, but Jack Stewart stopped at is Schwegman's the local? At a Schwegman's, which has its own racial history, by the way, and bought a bunch of stuff to make chili and called each of his faculty members and said, be at my house at 6 o'clock. Right? No, oh, that's what he told me, really. Well, tell us then. Good. Oh, tell us, because that's... Oh, tell us. That'd be great.
I was your second grade. Miss Manning.
Oh. So he told me that, but tell us what happened.
I found out because I was one who usually tended to get to school just in time. And the ranking teacher called and said that he would like us to be there early that morning. She may have even said he wanted to have a meeting or something, because when I walked there and saw all the people even, I wasn't aware that our school was one. I said, I guess they're congregating at all the schools. And it wasn't until I got upstairs that I found out that we were one of the schools. And so I don't know where he got that story from.
Well, it points to one of the flaws of doing oral history. But so was there a meeting that morning? Do you remember what happened?
I honestly don't remember if we had a meeting or not, because it seemed to be so much. Once I got in the school, there seemed to be so much excitement, you know, and most probably we did have a brief meeting in order for him to tell us, because he, as I say, he called the ranking teacher. That was the only one I thought he had told, and asked, I don't know if she called the whole faculty, but I thought she may have called me, since I was one who got there usually just in time. Oh. She wanted to be sure I kind of avoided the crowd if I could.
So you might remember the paper, though, and for this job.
What's that?
You might be able to help.
I was wondering, was it paper that they had? Because all of our windows had shades, and it could have been the shades. And What room were you all in with Miss Myers? In fact, Miss Myers is deceased. I didn't know if you knew that, but she is deceased.
On the first floor, right?
You were on the first floor?
Right by the stairwell.
Right by the stair? Okay, well, that did open onto the front, so most probably it was the shades that were pulled up, because her room was really in the little, not portable, the little annex building. That was where her room had been, and I think they moved her into the main building for protection because it would be much better. And I wasn't told this personally, but I can remember teachers, you know, have a tendency, many of them, not all of them, some of them run out of there at 3 o'clock, but many of them have a tendency to stay after school. And I can remember that the Marshals said, we're leaving at 3 o'clock. So that was one time I learned to leave school at 3 o'clock. Even before I had the girls, I mean, the first year. And the second year, we did go all the way through. And there were 3 white children in our class. And they only had a few white children in the school, because I remember the 4th grade near us had 1. And I think most of the rest were in the higher grades upstairs. But then when they saw that the children weren't coming back to the school is when I honestly don't know if they asked us if we wanted to move or if they just transferred us all out of the school. And I was wondering if you all had to go to Sims because they may have just left the school for a year before they turned it over to another faculty. I really am not sure about that. Did you learn anything about that in your?
I don't remember exactly when it was closed. I know it was closed.
And that was what I was wanting to ask you. Whom did you do research with? Because I have noticed a few little flaws. For one thing, the national, even now when they gave the story, they said there were 5 children. Well, one of the speakers earlier explained that there were supposed to be 5. But one of the children that was supposed to go to France, I think it was, had backed out because Ruby was not supposed to be by herself.
Exactly. That's what I said when I.
And
so
then,
tell us other flaws, but.
And then the fact that they also said that all the children came. I think in some report I heard all the children. May not be you.
No.
You know, but all the children came back. No, very, very few. As I say, I think we may have started off the year with just 1 white child, and then it went up to 2 and 3. And it was before the middle of the year, I think, that we had the 3. So we had 6 children altogether in our class. But any of the other classes where any white child came back, it was just 1 or 2.
Well, and you're talking, I mean, what?
This was when they were in 2nd grade.
Yeah, in the first year.
In the first year, there were none.
There were 2 families that stayed for about a week. One family was called the Gabrielles, and they were both in the service and had come to New Orleans even though they were from Rhode Island, and they didn't last long, and they actually moved back to Rhode Island. And then there was another family, and I don't know if the daughters in the auditorium tonight are not, called the Foremans. And Patricia was in school for about a week too.
Okay, well, I don't know how aware I was of that,
Yeah.
but I do know the year they were in 2nd grade, there were just a few came back, and once all the children left the first year, none of them came back. And that kind of surprised me because we serviced Jackson Barracks, and since there was military there, I was surprised that none stayed, but of course they had the choice of either coming to Orleans or St. Bernard. So I guess rather than take the heat, they just went on to St. Bernard Parish, some of them.
Yeah, that makes sense. A lot of them.
So.
Thanks for talking. That's great.
Hi. I just wanted to ask, did you remember when they integrated the swimming pool at Audubon Park, and then obviously when they were having the sit-ins at the counters and things over the years, is this when you're saying people manipulated y'all sort of for the press, or was this, do I have my years wrong? Was that before? I'm just wondering, did your family experience a special relationship to those historical events from from what you had been through? Did y'all?
I know what event you're talking about.
Okay.
But I'm not sure if it was the same year. I know it was during that time. That's when Avery Alexander was pulled up the steps and all of that. Yeah. I'm not sure if it was at the same time, though.
Okay, two questions. One question for the Marshals. Can you do a brief comparative description of your experience in terms of desegregating the New Orleans schools and your experience in terms of desegregating the University of Mississippi? The second question for the ladies, can you do a thumbnail sketch of your journey through public education from France through high school?
Marshals.
I'm not sure I can answer that to your satisfaction, but I was at both places, as Charlie and Herschel were. I think the best way I can describe it is the integration of the schools here in New Orleans was much more meaningful to me personally as a young father, because it involved young children, young innocent children who really knew nothing about life at all. That does not mean that I didn't think that the university should be integrated, but the people who were going into the universities at Mississippi and at Alabama and all the rest of them, wherever else we went, were adults. They had some experience in life. They understood more what was going on, while the young children could not possibly understand what was going on. And of course, the University of Mississippi ended up in being a real Donnybrook. That was, quite frankly, that was caused by the fact that Mississippi had a governor who was about two degrees below stupid.
Don't say what you mean.
And our politicians in Washington were playing political games back and forth with the governor. I know with the honest intent of trying to get things done peaceably, when we probably should have just gone in and kicked butt and didn't bother to take names to start with.
I think Al's covered it pretty well, but the violence, you know, we didn't experience violence down here as deputy marshals. The police kept the crowds back, and we didn't have to deal with the people. It was a whole different situation at Oxford. I mean, we had people shot. 2 people were killed, not law enforcement people. Bricks and bottles were thrown at us, and a lot of people were injured with severe bruises, cuts, or whatever. So it was a different order of magnitude as far as the violence between here and at Ole Miss.
You want me to answer? Okay, once we got, I would say fourth grade up, well, there were more black students, so we just got mixed with the crowd. Nobody knew who we were from any other child until we graduated from high school, and we got the congratulations for being the first to go to black, and then we were getting out of high school. But once we got mixed with the crowd, nobody really remembered us until that time. But you always remember somebody that have done you something. So I always remembered the other students, but they didn't remember me again until 12th grade.
So did you want to know what schools we went to from McDonogh 19? 19. Okay, so we went to McDonogh 19, and then the 3 of us went to Sims, 3rd grade. Leona left 4th grade, and she went to France. with Ruby. Middle school, Gail and I went to Rivers Frederick. Leona went to middle school
Joseph Cone.
Cone with Ruby. High school, I went to Joseph S. Clark. Gail, Leona, and Ruby went to Nichols. After 6th grade, I was finished with it. I told my dad and my mother I didn't want to do it anymore. So I was finished with it. And Rivers Frederick was an all-black school, and so was Joseph S. Clark. And those years, 7th through 9th grade, was a wonderful time for me. I think I needed that. I don't know what person I would be to this day if I would have continued through that. But I was able to appreciate music. You know, I was put in the band. I didn't even know what a flute looked like. And Mr. Houston pulled me aside and said, I need a flute player, and put a flute in my hand and taught me how to play a flute. And I played a flute junior high school, high school. I saw black operas. I mean, and I was able to appreciate things that I was taught at home, and that my parents, you know, expressed. And so I was able to appreciate that, whereas at the other schools, I don't think I would have gotten that. So when I went to Frederick in 7th grade, that was just a blessing for me. It really changed my life.
You have one question.
This is more of a comment. My name is Loretta Martin Brown, and I had the privilege of going to school, Tessie and Gail at the end, and Rivers Frederick Junior High School. And Tessie, I graduated with you from Clark. I'm Loretta Martin. Oh. And Gail Etienne, we went to Rivers Frederick Junior High School. And Mother and Tessie, I do have a copy of our 1972 yearbook from Joseph S. Clark High School. So I do want to say thank you for all of this. When I received the email, I am the assistant principal at Joseph S. Clark High School. And we do want to invite you all, if you have the time, to come and visit Tessie, your alma mater. If you can, you and your mother, your family, Gail, Miss Leona, all of you. But thank you to the Marshals and to everyone present. Here's a copy, and I do want you to sign. I do want you to sign the yearbook, Tessie. And thank you so much, everyone.
Well, I'm glad to meet you because I got 2 grandkids at your school, and they sit right there. So if you need me, just call me.